really looking for some kind of, thing for the Black History Month, and I was
Yeah.
inviting lots of people, and no one was responding. That was quite
Okay.
frustrating as
That's
well.
really sad.
But also, it kind of makes sense because lots of people are under so much pressure as well. Like they don't have time. But the problem is, if you don't do these things properly, then it will be just whitewashed, and then
Yes.
just tokenistic things. I mean, my earliest memory about Black History Month is, when I was a PhD student here, I used to work in a
Right.
call center.
Yes.
In that call center during the Black History Month, what they used to do is like the Black Employee of the Month.
Oh dear.
So that's
Yeah.
the thing they're still trying to do, like some kind
Yeah.
of like Caribbean food festival, or like, some kind of something, which has got nothing to do with
Yes.
about, the people's lives, the stories, our emancipation, our
Yeah.
understanding about the society you are living in, and the invisible empire
Yeah.
behind us.
Yes.
Always there. No one talked about the empire,
Yes. Yeah. And so they don't have a voice,
No.
and I think the point you made before is quite important. Yes, it's obvious that we don't have the time sometimes because we've got so many things going on. We don't just have our day job. We've got relatives back home. We've got children. We've got, a whole lot of communities who are dependent upon us. But somehow we have to make the time to have our voice heard so that our experience, our lived experience can be heard by other members of the community. And this is so important because when you get involved in organizations and so on, people think that you're a newcomer to the whole idea of organizing and participating in groups and so on. The reality is that you've been on the game for a long time. It's just that nobody has heard what bothered to hear what you've done or what you're doing or how you're participating in whatever group that you belong to or how your organization is operating and so on. And so this is where this is quite important. And of course, this is part of the accidents of history in the sense that, all of these technologies came about, but it's also a tool. Some people have used it for all sorts of razzmatazz and, God knows what, but it's also a tool for the communities to allow their voice to be heard by the groups who haven't heard of them, before. I was watching something the other day about a group in Turkey. And I was so taken aback because this is something that, that's almost like hidden from the rest of the world. But because of technology, because of Zoom, because of webinars, because of, using technologies like this, we're able to, podcasting, we're able to hear from these communities that would have, hitherto had gone unheard by the rest of the world and so on, which is why I find this whole session very, very helpful, especially in time of Black history. We need to be heard, but also we need to be seen as well, because far too often, things are done for us and so on our behalf without our input into it. And I think this is a time that we start to make an input into things. Yeah.
So, Juliana, my plan is to, especially you will tell your story. So I'm just like, I'll just listen to you.
Okay.
So you are telling a story.
Right.
To the people, don't know who will be the audience.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about the audience, but at the same time, I feel that you and I have serious goodwill for the future generation. That's why our ancestors, we're good people. That's why we are still alive here. We're still living this planet.
Yes.
So like the history, the way that told us that in the past, all people are just fighting with each other, killing each other. That's not true.
No, I mean, we're people of storytelling. And I think that's where we lost out in history, because we had people who documented their information in a way on paper and all sorts of things. And in the process, we were written out of history. And so our voice were not heard, both men and women, and all the other groups that's within our communities. And so I remembered one of my classes, somebody saying, these people discovered these people and all this. And I was thinking, so who were there before then? Were there nobody there? And that used to really, surprise me. And even then, even to today, people are still making that mistake. They're still talking in terms of when we discovered them, when we, did X, Y, Z. In one of my Black history, in a number of my Black history sessions, I had a student saying things like, well, we colonized them. Well, we, and I always ask the question, we who, who's we? And this notion that, the we are the ones who have the power to tell the rest of the world how they should live. And a lot of the young people have been socialized into believing this we story, and without looking at the other people's story about how they come to be, and it always brings to mind another story that Chimamanda Adichie told about how in their farm, in their community, they were looked at as being well off. And of course, they had all these housemaids and house servants and so on. And, all they knew about their servants is that they came and they did X, Y, Z, and then went back home. They didn't really, the servants knew all about them, but they didn't know anything about their servants until something happened. And then they discovered actually the servants have got a life away from being servants in their home. They have a family, they have another world that they don't have anything, they don't know anything about. And this is where the discrepancies come about, and we kind of lose sight of this. And there has to be, as you say, a room for space for people to tell their story, to be able to let the world know that, we lived before you came along. And in fact, if anything, we were there before you were there, so this is the reality that we have to kind of balance out the story so that it's not a one-track story, but a story that recognizes that other communities have been in existence before you even came across to their land, so this is something that's still they're still ongoing, and it's something that we need to kind of redress, regardless of how busy we are in the world today. Today I'm very busy today. My daughter came for a visit. I should be seeing her to the station and so, but I told her I've got this to do, and she recognizes, and she was quite happy to find her way to the station. But I could have easily said to you, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do this because I've got my daughter's, needs me immediately," and so on. And we do have to make sacrifices, and we do make a lot of sacrifices, but there are sacrifices we have to make on our own behalf, for our own people, for our communities, and so, because people have already done that in the past. There are people to whom we are standing on their shoulders because they had paved the way, they had made the sacrifices, they had, in fact, borne the brunt of all the ill treatment and so on over the generations and so forth. And so we too have to make some sacrifices. And I think that there's a gap missing, especially in Britain, where we have a situation whereby the youths have been it's almost like away from the struggle and have not really been participant. As when I was growing up, it was a rolling thing. But now there seems to be some bit of a gap in between. And that has been something that's quite telling in a lot of our communities and so on. And so somehow we have to find a way to bring our youth back into the fold, into the struggle, into what the issues are. We need to re-educate a lot of our young people. We need to re-educate ourselves and remind ourselves what the struggle is about. Because I think somewhere along the line, some of us have lost the plot somewhere and have actually gone away from what the issues were initially. And I recognize that things change all the time because it's, dialectical and all the rest of it. But we also have to recognize that there are certain things that has not really changed a great deal, because sometimes people say to you, and I'll give you an example of that, and issues of racism. and the inequality that exists for a lot of a lack of opportunity for a lot of Black people. And so you know, people will say to you, oh, things have changed. So can't you see things have changed? We've moved on, you know, this kind of stuff. And I, you know, and I have to check myself, and I have to ask the question, where have we moved to? You know, what's changed? Because for a lot of our young people, a lot of things haven't changed. And so we need to bear that in mind. And so maybe for a few individuals, there's been a sprinkle of, you know, goodies and material change and so on. But that we can't, you know, we have to be careful that we don't have this fell swoop idea that things have changed, because in reality, we know that a lot of Black workers in the institutions that we work in the colleges and the universities that we work in, are the ones who are facing a lot of issues of bullying, harassment, victimization, low pay, the ones who are in casualized labor, and so on. And so we mustn't lose sight of that. And you know, this claim that we've moved on, the reality is that we haven't gone anywhere. And this is something that, again, that I picked up the other night when I was chairing the meeting with some of the you know, Black trade unionists who've been in the fold for a long time. And one of the things that they are also saying is that things have really not changed. We think we've made inroads, but actually we haven't, because we're still not part of the furniture. We're still seen as the other. We're still on the periphery of the whatever is going on in this society. So that's something that we have to bear in mind.
Juliana, one of the things I really want to do is, will it be okay if I ask you some of your personal stories, like, you know, your earliest memories like you were sitting with your family, the kitchen table, and then the first political awareness, the consciousness.
I can tell you that it's from my father and also from my mother as well. One of the things that when we first started going to school and going to secondary schools, we came over from my parents. My father came over here to work as an engineer and a mechanical engineer. And when he came over here, his qualification was not recognized, for one thing. And of course, we were in Nigeria as young children with our grandparents. So the idea was, once they settle, they would come, you know, ask for us to come over and so on. And that's exactly what they did. Once they settled, we came over to meet up with them. And there was obviously a time gap between them meeting up with us again, because the civil war happened in Nigeria. As a child, we went through the civil war. And so, you know, coming over here, one of the things that you were taught is that you had to be mindful of who you are, and not forget that, you know, that where you're coming from, the family that you belong to, that your behavior has implications for the whole family and so on. And I remember the first day we went to school, and and you know, when we came back with one of our white friends came home with us, and you know, my parents entertained them quite well, and everything, you know, and so on. And when they went, my parents, you know, called us aside and said, look, yes, we don't mind you having white friends. Yes, we don't mind you, you know, bringing them home and so on. But I want you to be clear about one thing. And that is this: whenever anything goes wrong, you are the one who's going to get the blame. And the reason why they tell us that is because they've also been through the process of being blamed in their workplace, of, you know, not being recognized for their positions and so on. And the other thing they said is that you can be the best in your class, but you will not be recognized. And we found this to be the case throughout our growing up in this country and so on. But one of the things that my parents set store on was education. Because my father was of view that with your education, nobody can take that away from you. And he used to give us examples of people who came from Nigeria or Africa, or friends that they had who didn't study hard enough, or who didn't focus on their studies, and then went back to Nigeria and were sort of ridiculed and so on. So he obviously didn't want us to experience that. And so he's always had these examples, that we must study hard, the education is the only way you can progress in this society, and nobody can take that away from you. But what they didn't tell us that in the process of getting that education, you really have, you suffer, you really go through a lot of hassle getting your education. And this is where this notion of people having this view that Africans lived on the trees, and they discovered Africa and the African communities and so on. And I used to remember in the class, somebody would say something about Africa, and I'd be thinking, what are they talking about? Are they talking about the same place that I was coming from, or they're talking about something else? Yes, we went through the Civil War, and yes, there was a lot of crisis and so on. But the kind of things that they were talking about, I hadn't actually witnessed, and it's not because I come from a particular background or anything like this. Is a general thing because we lived in the village and all the rest of it. So all of this sort of story that they had was alien to me. And so I had to I'm forever trying to educate people, and also getting into fights because they had this very negative view about, what Africa and Africans are about, and what their lives are about. Yes, things are tough for some people and so on, but the kind of view that Europeans had about Africa was a very, very negative one. It was one that was fixed. It was one that was caught up in a time warp. That one that's not dialectical, the one that's not changing, is one that view Africans from the point of view of the slave and the slave master and so on. And those who are exploiting us view us in a particular way. So there's a lot of stuff that, people didn't have a clue about. And of course, there were a lot of things we as Africans didn't have a clue about because we were not living in the West. There were things now I know that's happened to Africa that I didn't know before I came out of Africa. Okay. So, because as a child growing up, I didn't, in this country, I used to think, people talk about they're coming from the Caribbean and they're Black. And I'm thinking, well, how can you be from the Caribbean? And how did you get there? And all that kind of stuff, until I come to understand about slavery and Atlantic slave trade and the colonization and all the rest of it. And then come to understand that the differences that exist between Africa and Europe and so on, and how Europe underdeveloped Africa and so on, and began to read about this. And I think my first political encounter was going to community meetings, growing up in Manchester and so on as a student, and being involved in Pan-Africanist movement and so on. And, and being involved in the discussions. And I remembered in my third year of university, I think it was in my third year of university, I was doing a course called Europe and Africa and so on. And started to it was a politics, I did sociology and politics degree, and started to read up, on my area and so on. And reading all of this stuff, and the more I read it, the more I got angry. And of course, the book list was very much Eurocentric and so on. And the more I read the stuff about how they discovered Africa and how Mungo Park went to this place, South Africa, all of these stories and so on. And I'm thinking, this is not right, And then I had the opportunity to go to Africa Liberation Day, which is ALD, which was held every on the 25th of May every year and all that sort of thing. So the first time I went to ALD, I was doing my master's degree, and I was thinking, where have I been all this time? All this has been going on, because the other thing as well was that our parents shielded us from a lot of stuff that was going on in the communities and so on. So of course, when we got to university, we had a chance to explore a bit more about our identity and where we're coming from and so on. So I went to the ALD, and people like Carlos Moore was talking about the Black Brazilians and so on, and in Cuba, the situation in Cuba and so on with the Black people and all the rest of it. And then you had people like Sheikh Anta Diop talking about the African origins of civilization. And then you had American and African American writers writing about Africans in science and so on. And I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing. You know, we had all these people speaking and a whole new range area, you know, developed for me. And I was thinking, my God, I really need to get into this, you know, and this was in my early 20s and so on. And so I, you know, got really involved and was reading a lot. And then I got involved in a group called the All African People's Revolutionary Party, which was part of Stokely Carmichael and all the other group of people and so on. And that was really telling for me. You know, going to ALD was an eye-opener, meeting all the other African organizations, having communications with them, people who are proud of their African identity. And I've always been proud of my African identity anyway. But to see people exhibiting this in a very positive way, because one of the things that used to happen was that you had people say things like, especially Africans who are born in the Caribbean, would say, you know, but the Africans sold us and all this kind of stuff. And I used to think, how is that possible? Because it's one of those stories that never was told when we were growing up. I mean, we heard about a bit about story about slavery and all that, but not in the same way that people are talking about it now. And also we had stories told about children being abducted and so on, but we never really thought anything about it. And our great grandfathers used to tell us stories about things that used to happen in the past, but we never made the connections, never made the linkages until, you know, I went to LD and got involved in all these other groups and so on, and got to know other African people and their stories and so on. Met up with other Africans from other parts of the world. And at the time, there were struggles going on in South Africa. There were struggles going on in Mozambique, Angola, in Eritrea, and so on, and Ethiopia and so on. And so there was so much going on in Africa. And so all of these organizations used to come to ALD, and they all had their own stories to tell. They all had all these struggles and so on. And so when I became involved with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, part of the work that we had to do was work with these sister organizations and to, you know, invite them to our events. And we participated in ALD every year. And we also had organized a whole range of what we call work study, because the idea is that part of the reason why, because one of the jokes that used to go on is that if you want to hide anything from an African or a Black person, you just have to put it in a book. The assumption is that Africans don't read, or people of African descent don't read. But of course, that's a lie, because we know that a lot of Africans came here to study. We know a lot of Africans came here to do their master's degree and do their PhDs and so on. And so, of course, so they did read, but they probably weren't reading the right kind of stuff. So on our book list, we had things like How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. We had Chancellor Williams, The Destruction of Black Civilization. We had Amilcar Cabral, Return to the Source. There was a range of reading materials. And of course, to be a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, you had to read all of these books. We had books like Malcolm X's book and so on, you know, a range of books from Africa, the Caribbean, from Americas and so on, so that you had a global picture of the type of things that's going on around people of African descent, and also non people of African descent as well, so that you're aware about the oppression that people are faced with, the issues that's going on around you. And so you come to understand how it is that we are where we are, because sometimes people are not aware of how we come to be where we are. And a lot of people don't even understand how we come to be in this country as well. The whole history of colonization, it meant that people, you know, I always remember Steve Nanden's story, talk about, you know, we are here because they were there, you know, and people don't make that connection. And so that was so, you know, that was so enriching for me. to read all these books, to make these connections, to go to the different organizations, sister organizations, events, and so on, to speak at those events, to be part and parcel of that whole process, to recognize what their struggle is about, to read about them, and so on. And so when we have the work study, we read the books and we have a discussion about what those books mean. And we look at it from the nation, class, gender approach. So the nation, obviously, we need to understand that Africa is prominent in our struggle. We also have to recognize that even within the African struggle, there's a class analysis that needs to be had about that struggle, that is not just about your skin color, but it's also, there's a class dimension to it, because the reason why, I mean, people often assume that, slavery happened because white people didn't like Black people. Well, actually, slavery happened because it was an economic necessity for Europe to survive and so on. And so people needed to understand that. People needed to understand the economic dynamics behind it all, the class angle, which is why Africa is still in a situation that it's in, because we have people who have class interests that they feel is prominent than, the nation of Africa, as it were. So there's that struggle. But also, there was also a gender aspect to it, because as an African woman, I recognize all of the, I'm an African, I belong to a particular class, and also I'm a woman, and so on. And so all of those things, calculate to oppress me as a human being. So I needed to recognize, and other people in the group need to recognize that too, both men and women. And so when we're looking at a particular struggle or look at a particular organization, we look at it from those particular angle. And so we read stuff about, so part of that work study as well, it was, we had to do geopolitical report. So you needed to know about what's going on in China, what's going on in Russia, what's going on in the Caribbean, what's going on in every part of the world. So it's not just about Africa, but you needed to know how all of those things are linked together with the struggle that's going on in Africa as well. And you needed to understand their historical base as well. Okay, so this is what that did for me. So coming away from my parents also, my parents gave us a sense of who, recognize who you are. Don't forget who you are wherever you go. Don't forget your, the importance of your name as well, which is why sometimes, when you hear somebody call you Juliana, sometimes you think, oh, are they talking about me? Because obviously you have to survive. You have to have, European name and all the rest of it, but also because of the Christian, the Christian history that we had in Africa as well. But, so the importance of that then is that quite a lot of our brothers and sisters who were enslaved in the past and so on have European names. And so there's no way of knowing where they are connected. So the name is so important. So when I had my children, they all have Igbo names, so they don't have European names. So when you hear their name, you know where they're coming from. You know who, which part of the world that they're connected to, and so on. And so this is so important and significant for us, because my parents also made sure that my brothers and sisters who were born in this country were also named, accordingly. So that's my story. So the story is that, and then I had this, this strong parental upbringing that, taught us who we are and so on. And then that enabled me to have that strength to be able to go out and connect with other groups and so on, and discover other things as well. And also the importance of education is very, very critical, but the right type of education, because I always, I never forget Ngugi's book, Decolonizing the Mind, where he talks a great deal about, the need to have the right kind of education, because you could have the education that teaches you that you're subservient, that you're a slave, that you're this and you're, all the negative stuff. But you need to have that education that tells you that you can change things, that the world is changing all of the time, and that you are part and parcel, and you have a place to, role to play within that. And this is what I try to inculcate in my children as well, that they, that they are world people, and therefore wherever they go, they must assert their position and who they are and so on, not be afraid to say, what they're about and who they are. Because the system that we're living in has a tendency to intimidate a lot of our people into subservience, into accepting a negative about who they are and where they're coming from. And so one has to be courageous enough, has to be strong enough and confident enough to say, I'm about this, I'm not about this, and be specific about it. So that's where I'm coming from, So yeah, that's the situation for me.
I'll try to tell a bit of my story, and then so that you can relate.
Yes, that's okay. Yeah.
So like my story is like, sometimes you go to those events, so like the way we are, even in the academia we're talking about, sometimes I feel that we just don't exist, our visibility is just like unbelievably low. You like go to a meeting, like people should say hi to you, like, hi, how are you? But one thing I noticed that whenever you go to a meeting a bit late, everyone is like kind of frowning upon you that, oh, late, you don't understand the cultural aspect of, things. I mean, one of my stories, I try to work with the local community as well, because I teach politics. The politics is important because the politics happening in Pakistan or Bangladesh are actually, moving things here as well. So sometimes you invite them and, it's like guest host relationship. So, part of the cultural understanding is, when you invite people, you have to be with them for some time, isn't it? Because you are the host there. and then perhaps you have got another meeting somewhere. So it became late. And then you have to explain that, because I was hosting an event and there are like people there. And if I had left earlier than they actually left themselves, it would have been very disrespectful to them.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to tell those stories, because it, as if like, the way things are, it's like onus is on us to explain us again and again and again. So like part of me, I became like over the years, first like Malcolm X obviously played a big role in my understanding about, the consciousness about, and then suddenly I realized that the people who think they're powerful, they're actually not powerful.
No.
If you resist, if you challenge them, they have got no answer.
Yes.
So sometimes, we go to those things and then someone says something, very casual way. And then when I respond with like, why did you say that? It's very hurtful to me. And you can see suddenly the room is like, 30 seconds pin drop silent. Because normally they don't get that kind of challenge. They're not used to this challenge.
Yes.
So you can see always there's a power relations heavily skewed, like, I mean, the power is on us and then try to find out our way out. But I think part of the game is, there's no challenge from us as well. So like when they talk about, the Black History Month, as if like the empire has to give us something, rather than the actually empire is built on that history, not the other way around.
Yes.
So the story, the knowledge they created through their scholarship.
Yes.
So when I teach like Edward Said, Orientalism, so these things are very important for me, how the knowledge is being created and orchestrated and then packaged such a way, and then saying that, oh, do you know what? You are the bad guy, not me.
Yeah.
So I was talking with like some scholar on Italian politics, like recent Italian politics is, there's a far right party in power. So her slogan is basically saying that I am woman, I'm Christian, I'm Italian, and they want to take it away from me. So first of all, who wants to take it away from you? I said, oh, it could be like the immigrants from North Africa. But if you see the history or statistics, that's not actually true. Statistically, it's other way around.
Exactly. It's like what we've got at the present time, isn't it? With Sunak, in power.
So I mean, suddenly, like, yeah, we are represented by a billionaire, but nothing to do with like anything.
Exactly. Exactly.
So suddenly, Tory party become the most diverse party of the country.
Yes.
So I mean, I think Malcolm X was very clear about those things. It's like he was, and I see the struggle your life my life, and I don't think it will stop with our life. It will carry on.
Yes.
The blind spot they created, the knowledge they created is such huge. But at the same time, if you don't challenge it, I think the blind spot will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And when the car crash happens, I think the casualties will be much, much higher.
That's right. Yes.
So, so what kind of society are you actually looking for? So like when you talk about Black History Month, it's actually not about Black History Month. It's about, what's happening in the society.
Exactly. Yes.
That's the story we need to know.
Yes. Yes. I think we need to obviously raise a lot of people's awareness, but I think also we need to be aware that the history, the mistakes of history, I would say, is that people are quite happy with what they have. And one of the things, I recognize over the years and from sayings of other people is that people in positions of power do not want to give up their power. They do not want to give up their position because they're quite comfortable, they're quite happy until you shake that tree that they are on, that whatever it is that they're on. That's the only time things change. The point you made about how we are perceived as an African woman, the way we're perceived is so negative. I mean, you consider this power structure, the white man, the white woman, the Black man, then the Black women and all that kind of stuff. We are at the bottom of the scale. And so because we're at the bottom of the scale, people expect us to just stay there. And if you dare to challenge anything, then you are the problem. You are the troublemaker. Now, I was brought up in a society where women had positions, where women had authority, where women were respected because of who they are and so on. And of course, the onset of colonialism actually set that backwards, and so women have had to be happy what they have. But I come from a community where women's position and women's view and voice is something that is heard, is something that is expected, that you will have proactive activity to contribute to the communities and so on, and not shy away from that. And so when you raise your voice in a meeting, for example, people look around as if to say, how dare she speak? And I'm like, I will speak. Because I want my voice to be heard. I need to speak because otherwise you're not going to hear what I have to say. You're not going to change in the way that you view me. And so I need to alert you and call you to attention to the way you're behaving or the way you're treating me or the way you're relating to me. And I think in our workplaces today, obviously I didn't talk about my workplace experiences and so on, but as I mentioned before, a lot of Black workers, men and women, are experiencing very negative things and so on. But Black women experience the worst of it all. There are certain things, things that Black men may do, and they kind of like think, oh, they just ignore it. But a Black woman will do that. That is taken to task, and you are pillarized for it. And so, so our treatment is slightly different. The oppression is the same, but there is a difference in the way that it's meted out and so on. And so we have to recognize, we have to challenge that, and we challenge it at our own peril. Because at the end of the day, you have to do this by yourself, because the systems that exist do not always recognize our oppression in the way that we would like it to recognize it. And I actually think that those structures exist to maintain the system, as it were. It's not really a challenge to the system, because if we think about one of the things that a lot of Black workers are talking about, especially in terms of union, is first of all, is lack of recognition, lack of representation, but also lack of representation in matters of workplace oppression. And so they don't always feel that their needs are being met. But rather than say, okay, where is those needs not being met? How are we going to rectify this? What happens is that the system says, oh, if you don't like it, forget it. And they shove you aside. And in fact, they then label you as a troublemaker, as the one who creates the problems. And then they try to split your struggle with those people who you call as being part of your struggle, try to split up the struggle because you are not only struggling on the basis of class, race, and gender, but there's a whole range of other things that you're struggling with. And so that whole thing about we're all one, it's not always the case. You know, there are cases where you have to recognize that there are differences, and those differences create barriers, and barriers means that we cannot unify as workers. And until we get rid of those barriers, and until we get rid of those things that cause destruction between myself and yourself from coming together and working together, we cannot move forward. But what tends to happen is that the person then who is in a position of power, or in a position either racial, class, or gender, will use that the whole division as a way of creating a split between the groups, rather than, you know, the groups using it to bring themselves together and fighting their common enemy. And this is where the struggle becomes really splintered and becomes problematic in the way we fight it today. And so, so the point that you made about the situation in Italy and so on, we have the same situation now with Sunak in position, because people are thinking, oh, he's in position now, so that means that, you know, all our jobs is going to go, all our this is going to go, all our, you know, everything. And people are getting all nervous. Oh, they're going to treat us really badly because we treated them badly and so on. When actually, people are not thinking in that way. And of course, what happens is that the racism becomes, you know, gets cranked up even further up, and people, the tension begins to become even more between the different groups in society and so on. So this is why there is a need for us to raise awareness. A month is not enough for Black history. Obviously, we need to be in a situation where, like in Wales, where they've included it in their curriculum, as part of their curriculum, as part of the history curriculum and so on. Because you cannot have Black history, or you cannot have any history without Black history. Because if we think about where all humanities are coming from, there's no way you can have a situation whereby you'll say, oh, let's just have a bit of time in the year where we recognize a whole group of people, you know, who had actually been at the apex of history, and say this is where we're at. Okay, so there's a lot of areas that we need to really delve into in terms of Black history. A lot of our subjects that we teach in Europe have, you know, its origin in our communities, in Black communities, in African communities, and so on. So why aren't we looking at that? Why aren't we, if we look at mathematics, for example, why are we looking at the origins of mathematics rather than the bit that the Europeans have stolen from their origins, and just, you know, that's what they teach, you know? Why are we looking at who, you know, how did it come about, and so on? So there's a whole range of, you know, language as well. The same thing with every subject. Why are we not looking at that? Why are we not looking at the roots of all of these subjects if we're really interested in making a difference? But we take the bits that suits us because we're in a position of power, and we leave the rest. The other thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about my upbringing was as well, as part of my raised awareness, was the way in which the education system in this country was making a lot of young Black people educationally subnormal. And so one of the things I was involved in as a student was what we call the Black, we call Saturday schools. Okay, so as a student, I was involved in Manchester growing up with the Saturday schools. And Saturday schools was something that was developed by the African Caribbean, people of African origin coming from the Caribbean. When they recognized that the system was not catering to the needs of their children in the education system, what they then did was, as parents, because some of them were former teachers, but because they were coming from the Caribbean, their qualification wasn't recognized, and so on. Some of them are from the African continent as well. Some of them were from India and Pakistan, and so on. And so one of the things I recognized was that children were coming back from school and having really very negative reports. Some of them were also not getting the qualification in order to get jobs or move on or progress in society and so on, or take up the further opportunities. So what the parents did was to want to stem this, they started the Saturday schools. And Saturday schools was organized from primary school on to secondary school before the students go on to university. And so what you did, and also later on, we was expanded for students who are in the university as well. And the idea was to provide these young people with the basic core skills in mathematics and English and science, so that they are able to deal with the situation at school. Because teachers, rather than becoming local parenters, white teachers I'm talking about, viewed Black children in a very, very negative way. And therefore their educational achievement was not forthcoming. And so parents recognized this. And because back in the country where they come from, the teachers and parents are one and the same. And so if a teacher said that you are not doing very well or whatever, your parents instituted this even more. Or if your parents felt that you're not doing very well, they would go to the school and have a word with the teacher, and things will be sorted out for you. And so there was no division between the two. But here there was a clear demarcation between the experience of young Black children in schools and how this was impacting on their future. So I was involved in this, and I saw for myself the firsthand the impact of miseducation on young Black people. And so when I started teaching, I got involved in teaching access to higher education. And that is access to higher education for Black students. And this came about because the riots took place in all the major cities in England and Wales and Scotland and so on. And so they recognized that a lot of young Black people were not getting, if you looked at the high streets in Manchester, in London, in Nottingham, in Sheffield, wherever you care to go, to Liverpool, you found that there were no young Black person in positions or jobs or whatever. They were either cleaners or don't even have a job. And so what the access courses did was a recognition that a lot of these young people do have some skills, but they're coming out of school with nothing. And so you had to provide a program that bridged between secondary school and university so that they are able to go on to university. So you had this very intensive one-year program called the Access to Higher Education. And a lot of the students who were on those courses were mostly Black. And so when I started teaching in Manchester, one of the classes I started to teach was on access to higher education for Black students. And so they were intensely taught and then go on the skills, the basic skills to be able to survive at university. But what became apparent was that these students were not stupid, they were not daft, but there was a systemic program organized to stop them from progressing. And so you had the careers officers telling students that they are not going to be able to study medicine because they don't have XYZ, or their fathers or their mothers were not medical doctors, or they could not become a lawyer because XYZ. Almost like what Malcolm X went through when he wanted to become a lawyer. He was told, oh, you cannot become a lawyer because your type don't become lawyers. And that was also being replicated in this country in a big way. And so the system was systematically undereducating Black kids and so on, but also the negative chit chat between the teachers and the career officers also meant that a lot of them began to believe that they are not capable until they came through the access courses and found that actually they are capable of doing this. And one of the other things that we instituted on the access was to teach them about their history. And when you have these students with their own knowledge of their history, they were like, you could not keep them down because they now recognize first of all, the importance of education, but also recognize who they are in this whole schema of the education system.
I'll try to bring a couple of my understanding about some of the things I teach. So I teach Middle East politics, and also because I'm from Bangladesh, so I've got lots of like my own lived memories as well. And once I started teaching like things like Orientalism by Edward Said, one thing like really like came to my my understanding about my own existence is, he was talking about, like, we are supposed to not to represent us. We must be represented by them. And I think that knowledge is a simple sentence, but that's knowledge being done such a way, and it became so powerful. And then what we are saying, it's like systemic, the structure it built on.
Yes.
Like some of the things you do, like, when I teach, like even the Iraq invasion in 2003. So you can see, like, so the people here or in America, they know about Iraq, what actually White House know about Iraq.
Yes.
Not about what actually Iraqi people are.
Exactly.
And during that time, I mean, Edward Said was still alive then. He was horrified. Two of the scholars they hired, White House, are actually known racist. But those people were actually teaching in American university for years. Yes. And they became, Middle East expert. And I can see, like, with that kind of knowledge, what we got at the end. Because this knowledge is about actually not people. It's about, something else.
Yes.
Bad faith.
Yes.
Bad faith is, if you can dehumanize them, you can make serious amount of profit out of it.
Yes.
And also, if you can dehumanize them, that means you can actually perpetrate serious amount of violence as well.
Yes.
When you come here in the Western world, you read, like, people like John Stuart Mill, like James Mill. These are the very enlightenment figures. But with me, I have got a different story about them.
Yes, of course.
Like John Stuart Mill's father, James Mill, he'd never been to India.
Exactly.
He knew anyone from India, but he wrote 6 volumes on India. 6 volumes. It's not only him, he's like writing alone.
Yes.
Friends are like, Jeremy Bentham, the Ricardo, all those famous people around him.
Yes.
No one stopped him that why you are writing it, man.
Exactly.
And the good news for him is James Mill, like John Stuart Mill's father, he ended up getting a job with East India Company.
Wow.
And the salary was, today's money, £2 million.
Wow. This is a thing, it's a brainwashing that goes on, and people don't recognize that. And part of the things that we were doing in the access courses as well was that when we had tutorials with our students, obviously we taught the core skills. They needed to know how to note take, how to read, how to write, and all the rest of it. But we were also mindful of the content of what they're reading as well. So when they have tutorial, study skills or presentation and so on, we had a list of areas that they could do their presentations on as well. So in my own reading list, and also in my own, given my background and so on, I also had for students that they should look at some of these organizations who were involved in the struggles for their people. So you had students looking at PLO, you had people looking at Eritrean People's Organization, you had students looking at even the EEC, we had students looking at that, because my view is this: if you're going to criticize anything, you need to understand what that thing is all about. You need to understand the history of it. Okay, so if you're going to criticize the National Front, you need to know what their history and their ideology is about. And so students had things like, they had to, some of them were doing presentation on ANC, PAC, some of them were doing presentation on the Cuban Revolution, some of them were looking at Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and all of those kind of, Patrice Lumumba, and so on. Nkrumah and so forth, people that were Indira Gandhi, all of those people that they would not look at under the mainstream education. But they understood the connection with this when they looked at the Black history, because the history I was teaching them wasn't the history just about Africa. They also knew about the history of Asia, the Mohenjo-Daro civilization, the Harappa civilization, the Chinese civilization, what went on in the Caribbean, the Aztec civilization, and so on. So the West African civilization, East African, North African, so they could understand the connection between knowing what's going on in Cuba, what's going on in India, what's going on with the PLOs and so on, what's going on with the Eritrean people, where that struggle came up, what caused it to happen. You know, they needed to understand that these people weren't just fighting for the sake of fighting, but somebody actually came and put fire in their communities and set it ablaze. And so this is where that whole struggle came about. So they needed to understand the historical base of this struggle and connect it with their own identity of who they are and where they're coming from, and understand where they are why they are located where they're located in that position in the British society as well. Now, the point you made about John Stuart Mill's father writing about India, I started to do my PhD, and then, you know, this day after I had my children and all that, I wanted to focus on my children. But I was going to, before I got married, I was going to an event that was organized by the African, a group called the African whatever historical group and so on. But when I got there, there were a few Africans, yes, but it was all, you know, white European groups that were organizing this stuff, you know, and looking at the history of Africa and so on. And what they were doing was discussing the research they were doing on African communities in this country, as well as in Africa as well, and so on. And so there was this woman there who claimed to have done a research on the African community in Liverpool from Sierra Leone. So she started to tell the story about how she started her research, about, you know, who the outcome of the research and so on. Unfortunately for her, there were women in the group who were from Sierra Leone, who belonged to that community, you know? And so she started to tell this story, and they were looking at each other and thinking, so when she finished, they allowed her to finish, and they said, can you just tell us again which community you said you've done this research on? And she said, and she thought maybe they had this fantastic question to ask, and they said, well, we're from that community, and we're quite prominent in that community, and we're well organized in our community. And if you were doing a research in our community, we would know who you were, because we would be the ones that you would have to come through in order to do that research. And we can tell you right now that you spoke to nobody in our community. And this is in this country, okay? So there's a lot of stories that's been bandied about Africans, about people who are dispossessed of their positions and power and status by those who claim to be powerful because they're in the position to do so, okay? In my classroom, in my class, a white student can get up and feel that they can tell me off because they don't recognize my authority as a Black woman lecturer, because they feel that they have been empowered to be able to do so, to question my authority, to question, you know, everything you raise or say to them, and so on. So this is where it's all coming from. Colonialism has a lot to answer for. And so this is why there's a lot of fight by people to maintain the positions, because why should they give up their position? Why should they give up this power that they have? You know, because it makes them very, you know, it puts them in positions of power and so on. And I recognize this when, again, when there was a program on TV where they were interviewing young Black students as well as white students in the same room. When they were in the same room, Black children found it difficult to say what they wanted to say or to be who they wanted to be. But when they were separated, the Black students were more animated, more, you know, more interactive, more forward-going and so on, looking as and so on. Their white counterpart, on the other hand, when they were on their own, did not feel comfortable because they didn't have anybody to prop them up. Because that's what these young Black people were doing, propping them up, you know? And they felt this immense power over them, you know? Because and also some of our young people have internalized some of this stuff. And I think this is where this whole issue is there and is prominent. And whilst I am in favor of class struggle, I think we need to recognize that there are fundamental issues that needs to be addressed in relation to race in this country. And we cannot pretend and shove it under the carpet and say, these things are not an issue to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with, because that will always be a barrier between the different groups coming together, okay? One of the things I struggled with, and I'm still struggling with, is when people say things like this to me. White working class did not benefit from the oppression of Black people. And I have to say, I am sorry, but I really have issue with this, because when I remember the quote from Rhodes, one of the things he said was that the colonization of Africa, and in fact the rest of the world, in the interest of Britain and British people, is a bread and butter situation, okay? And we know that all classes in Britain benefited from the slave trade and from colonization. And we cannot get away from that factor, okay? And people will say to me, but you're not, you're creating division. No, I'm not creating division. You need to educate a lot of our young white working class children that this is what the history has done. And until you can teach that history and correct that history and begin to get a lot of our young white and Black students to see what that history is like, then it's going to be really difficult to say that, well, white people did not benefit, or white working class did not benefit. Which planet are we on? Okay? This is what it's all about. So we, with all of this fight about, our jobs is going to be taken away from us and all the rest of it, if we don't educate people to recognize that the oppressor is one and the same, and the oppressed are one and the same, that ain't gonna happen, because we need to educate all people. My thing is to educate young Black people to recognize, and white people to recognize, that this is why we are in oppressive relationship, because we've had colonialism, we've had slavery, and this has been perpetuated through neocolonialism, and that has been going on forever. And so therefore, the education system is still very much ethnocentric. And even when we claim to be, making a difference by introducing religion in primary school and secondary schools and so on, it's still very much European religion that's being taught in a lot of the cases, okay, at the expense of the other religions and so on. And when we're thinking about, cookery classes, we're still teaching European cookery to a greater extent. When we teach about the Caribbean or the Asian or whatever cookery, we do it as a tokenistic gesture, not really as part of the mainstream provision that should be taught to all students at all times. Okay, when we're talking about then the Black history is another token gesture, Black History Month, again, we need to look at why we are only, especially in England, we are not making Black history part and parcel of the curriculum and something that needs to be taught for all students from a particular point of view, and not this washed down version that people want us to believe to be Black history. And also when we talk about languages, we're not starting from European languages only. We need to look at all languages. The only time students come across other languages is when they go to university. Okay, if you look at the African and Oriental studies schools and so on, they've inculcated African, Asian, and all the other groups, languages and so on. But that's at the university level. It needs to be from the from the bottom upwards and so on, not when they've reached the point where it does not matter anymore. So I think that's something we need to work really hard to achieve. Education needs to be sorted out, needs to be decolonized, need to recognize that there are a lot of voices that are not being heard, needs to recognize that the damage that has been done by colonialism and slavery needs to be done on a systematic and continuous basis in order to get rid of this notion of I'm superior and you're inferior sort of notion that exists. And this is something that's still in existence. And this is something that we need to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, I'm like really interested in that, this aspect of knowledge, how knowledge is being created and orchestrated, and then became, your understanding about the whole thing. So, that when working class white people say that, we are not the beneficiary of this or that, but you can see that historically that knowledge has been created to them.
Yes.
Because when like James Mill was writing 6 volumes of India, it's not innocent, did you see?
Yes.
That knowledge is not innocent because lots of people will read it.
Yes.
And these are the people, because he was writing this book during the colonial era, lots of people will be posted in India as a civil servant from UK.
Yes.
So what they will have a very dehumanized understanding about India.
Yes.
So that's why you can see that the colonial history is so keen about violence.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like when this like US invasion in Afghanistan, or you say the knowledge was created for them. That's why they voted.
Yes.
75% voted for the invasion.
Yes. Yes.
But at the same time, did you see like they went to Afghanistan and then they came back after 20 years by spending $1.3 trillion.
Yes.
So they did it because the people actually voted for it.
Yes. Yes.
So it's not like the people are innocent because you see, because the knowledge being created for them, and then they told that this is the knowledge that they actually want liberation from us.
Exactly. Yes.
And you accepted that position. Now you just cannot say that you've got nothing to do with that.
Exactly. Exactly.
So that really worries me, because the problem is then you just carry on with your life. And you will forget that you spent $1.3 trillion, even the soldiers lost, the people who served, even for your country, they also lost their lives, their families being destroyed.
Yes.
It's not only the Afghanistan obviously decimated, but also your life is decimated as well.
Of course.
So that knowledge is never been challenged or understood.
Yes.
So what this will do, you will do it again.
Of course.
Again,
yeah.
again. Oh, yeah. And the problem is, you might again say that, oh, I've got nothing to do with this.
Yes.
I never got any benefit from this.
Exactly.
The problem is, did you see that? The knowledge was given to you, and you saw that, that's a good idea.
Yes, yes.
So it's not like that you are innocent bystanders.
That's right. But what they forget is that the media is so cunning and really very good at manipulating images.
Like, when we went to Afghanistan, that we needed to liberate women in Afghanistan.
Yes.
I mean, people like Tariq Ali, they were saying that, Afghanistan's women were actually trying to liberate themselves.
Yes.
The early 20th century. And if they were given that liberation in the earliest 20th century, they would have been the first women in world history to become the women have the voting right.
Yes.
Do you know who stopped that?
Yes, of course, we know.
So the British colonial rulers, they stopped.
Yes, of course, of course.
They could have done it like 100 years ago.
Without any problem.
So
yes, exactly.
Now, after 100 years, you decided that, okay, now we have to liberate them.
Exactly.
They are creating knowledge that when they need to be liberated and when they don't need to be liberated.
Exactly, yes.
And who belong to this country and who will not belong to this country.
Exactly.
And, who will be invaded and who will not be invaded.
Who cannot be invaded, exactly.
Because everything is like, manufactured by them.
Yes.
And then we are told that accept it.
The same thing happened in Nigeria during the colonial rule. I don't know if you're familiar with about women's war, the women's war in Nigeria. And it's reported by the British historians as a Aba riot. So if you call it a riot, then it means that it has no substance. It means that it was chaotic, it didn't have any organization or structure, and so on. But, those people who have gone away and studied this women's organization and so on in Nigeria and so forth, have found that actually the reason why the war took place is because, and it's called the Women's War for a reason, is because the women are the bedrock of their markets in Nigeria and in a lot of West African countries. And so they are the gatekeepers for a lot of things that goes on and so on. And so the British decided that they wanted to tax the women of their substance. And their substance is what they use to support their family, support their husbands, support their children, and so on in their education and so forth. And so they wanted to do this. And so the women said, not on our watch. You're not going to do this to us. You're not going to take our money. And, because what was happening was the British were taxing Nigerians as well as other African countries and repatriating the money to Britain. And of course, using the money sometimes to run the countries as part of the indirect rule that they had instituted in these countries. And so the women stood their ground. And so when they sent this district officer to come and institute this law and all the rest of it, with all his cronies and all what Malcolm X would call their house niggers and so on. The women sent them packing, and in fact, they created a situation where the district officer was murdered, and a whole lot of other situations happened. And of course, the British then ordered their soldiers to come in and shoot some of the women, and some of the women were shot down. But these are women who from time have always challenged any incursion on their independence, and has always been astute about where they're coming from and who they are and so on. And they would challenge anybody who, even the men in their community do not challenge them in the way that the British sought to challenge them. And so this is what they did. The same thing happened in Ghana, where they wanted to go and sit on the chief's stool, which is never done. No foreigners can do this, okay? And so when they refused, they sent the chief on exile from his own country. So because they had the military might at the time and were able to do it. So this is what's been going on, and it's done in conjunction with all the institutions in this country, the media, the police, the military, the education system, you name it. They are all working together in cahoots to maintain this order, this status quo, this position run by the ruling classes, to maintain their positions and so on, to stop the working classes from unifying, from fighting back, from recognizing that there are oppressed groups. And this is what's going on. And of course, a lot of the time people buy into it. So when the situation gets tough, the ordinary people go shopping, because that is what the system has engineered to ensure that they don't recognize who their common oppressors are. And this is where in education, we really need to do a lot more to educate people to recognize this division that exists in our communities.
I mean, like, one of the most powerful thing I actually learned from Malcolm X is, this is a very famous quote, and I still kind of always, whenever I go to his class, it kind of reminds me that, because I'm a teacher, I've got a very, very important job here. The quote was like, he was saying that if you're not careful, the media will tell you the oppressor is the victim.
Yes. Yes, but they're doing it now.
So you have to be very careful, isn't it? When you decide who's the oppressor.
And so this whole thing of, maintaining your own, keeping it, within our borders and so on, is something that's been done systematically, and it's still being done systematically. And we see it in our workplaces. We see it in the positions that our communities of lecturers are holding. We see it in the casualization of labor, because you're never permanent. And so you can never challenge certain things, because if you consider that some of the lecturers that we come across and some of the workers we come across are not permanent, they are temporary, they're casualized, that puts their position at a jeopardy, because they cannot they feel that they can't challenge anything, because if they challenge, they get booted out, and then they have no income to support their family. And we know that you're only about 3 wage packets away from being made homeless. Okay, so therefore people then put up with stuff and are suffering in silence. But there comes a point where people feel that enough is enough. I cannot tolerate this nonsense any longer. I need to move away from this mess because it's poisoning my system and it's jeopardizing my mental health. And so now what we have in education at all levels is the hemorrhaging of Black workers. And the latest one I read about was about this geophysicist who left his institution because of the way he was being treated. Okay. And yet we're told that there are no Black role models, but there are Black role models, but you're not treating them right. Okay. You're not treating them like human beings. You think that they are just around to be in the background so that you can be said that you are, representative. But actually, you're not representative because you're killing these people. You are squashing their intellect. You are not allowing them to thrive. You are micromanaging them to death in their institutions. You're not allowing them, you're not giving them the right sources or resources to be able to research, to travel, to do the same thing that their colleagues are doing. And this is where it becomes problematic. And I think it's really difficult when you've been brought up in another community, in another society with a certain mindset, and to come to a situation whereby people vacillate between, what is good and what is bad and all that kind of stuff, but based on their own individual needs, not a collective thing. If you're coming from a society where collectivism, where people are important more than objects or all the other stuff and so on, are not objectified and so on, then you tend to view the world quite differently. And now we live in a society where people have been socialized that me, myself, and I is more important than any other person. And so you walk around, you prowl around the world, and you think that you have every right, and of course, the other thing about that is that might is white and white is right. And therefore you walk around and you're feeling, yes, I am right, I am white, I am mighty. And of course, when I look at my history, I see the destruction my people have done in the past. And so we go around talking about, we did this to them and we did that to them, without recognizing that actually in the process of doing that to them, it has repercussions.
It's not like, you will not suffer. It's like collective suffering. You will continue.
Yes.
So it's not like my job or your job. It's like everyone's job.
Everybody's job. Yes.
Have that understanding. Otherwise, we all suffer.
Yes.
I saw like, in 2015, UK has got like 105 billionaires.
Yes.
In 2022, there are 177 billionaires. Wow. So what's happening there?
Yes. It's like people are benefiting from other people's suffering.
You can see like, and on the other hand, the 15 million people are living,
in poverty.
Poverty line.
Yes, that's right.
And 6 million, they are children.
Yes.
What's going on here?
Exactly. Exactly.
So those questions are not asked.
Exactly.
But you were told that, you know what? The problem is actually the immigrants.
Yes, yes. I mean, this is that question often asked, who are the real criminals, in society, Is it the ones who go out into the shop and pick up a loaf because they're starving and have to, or is it the ones who have billions stashed away in offshore, who don't pay any tax, but somehow you've normalized it so that people view the person who's gone out to the shop and picked up a loaf of bread without paying for it as the real criminal, when actually you have stolen from the community and gone and stashed it somewhere else. Without paying any dividends to that community. So this is where it's sad, and it's become normalized. And people have taken it in because they've been brainwashed. So there's been, if you like, a preparation for that to happen over a period of time. And it's cemented, and as time goes on, you keep cementing more and more and more, and people start to say, yeah, that's correct, you're absolutely right, that is how it is. But actually it isn't, because the reality is that those people who are creating that foundation are the ones who are burying the communities and destroying them and stopping them from coming together. Because if we look at how our our timetables are organized now in our workplaces, you will see that you hardly have time to scratch your bum, let alone to talk to your next door, to your colleagues and so on, because they got you moving all the time. You're teaching from one class, another class, another class. You don't have the time to organize, to do anything, because that is what the system is about. The system wants to make it so that we do not come together, speak with each other, or challenge what is going on there. And what's happening is that you have a situation whereby people are just expendable. Lecturers are expendable. Students are expendable. Student experience doesn't exist. They can only talk about student experience in relation to lecturers, but not in relation to the system as a whole, because then you would, they'll be found out. Okay. So the focus will be, oh, how was that lecture? Was the teacher animating enough? Were they doing a song and dance and saw the rest of it? So that become the focus, not the quality of as you walk into the building, what was it like for you? How did you feel? Did you feel that you were catered for? Were you able to access the learning center? Were you able to access the computer? Were you able to access a psychotherapist? Were you able to access accommodation officer? Were you able to? All of those don't matter anymore. Okay. And this is why we're in the situation we're in. And this is across the board, from FE to HE and so on. And the prisons, don't even let me start talking about the prisons education, and it's the same thing that we are under. And this is why we are in crisis. A lot of mental health issues are not being dealt with amongst the young people. And we're going to suffer the consequences if we don't act now.
I mean, like last 30 seconds, actually. Yeah, I was talking to my union meeting yesterday that I never felt this amount of disillusionment in my academic career. Like the more I'm thinking now that, what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
What I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with education, everything is hostile.
Yeah.
Even if you go to like campus shop, there's a campus shop there.
Yeah.
This is the most expensive shop. So, you are talking about help students.
Yes.
When I was growing up in Bangladesh, the university, the state university, that was, I had good memories. I had good memories with my teachers, with my professors. I had good memories about green space.
Exactly.
I had good memories about those, green shops.
Yes.
That you could get the cheapest food and the finest food ever, healthiest food ever. But here, what's this going on here?
I know. But the students can't even afford a sandwich in the they can't even afford to eat. They have to go outside of the college to buy the food because it's cheaper for them, and it's that is the crisis that they're under. And some of them are having to work because obviously their parents can't afford to. Some of them, their parents lost their jobs during the COVID period. Some of them lost their parents as well, or relatives during the COVID period. So there was no provision to stem the impact of that for our students, or even our staff for that matter. Because a lot of them are lost relatives and so on. Yeah, there's no support whatsoever.
Absolutely none.
And you just have to keep plodding on until the person has a nervous breakdown or something, or decides to leave. That's when people pay attention. But even before then, nobody pays attention. They're all under a lot of pressure, day in, day out. And this is where we really, as a union as well, have to look at these issues. The workload is astronomical, and people are caving under the pressures that they're under.
Juliana, thank you so much. But at the same time, it's not my job to talk about this all the time. I will do it in my own time, in my own space.
Yes, of course, yes.
But collectively, it's everyone's job.
Yes.
What kind of society you're looking for here? It's everyone's responsibility.
Exactly.
You just get on with your life. without having the understanding what's going on.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, if you don't deal with it, it comes back to bite you.